My name is Camille Walker. I'm 42 years old, and for the last 3 years, I built the operations department at Westbridge Solutions like it was my own company, from 12 team members to nearly 50, from backlogged chaos to nationwide efficiency. I gave it everything. And today, I was supposed to be recognized for that. But if you've ever been overlooked by someone you trusted, especially in the name of family politics, then I need you to hear this story. Drop a comment if you've ever been passed over for something you earned. Tap like if you believe merit should come before connections. And please subscribe if you want more real stories of women who rise from the ashes. Because today, I realized what it feels like to vanish in plain sight. It started in the conference room, 10 a.m., sharp, just like the calendar invite Gerald had sent. Gerald Walker, my boss, my mentor, my father-in-law. The table gleamed under the recessed lighting. There were champagne flutes at every seat, which should have been my first red flag. No one pours champagne for a routine announcement. I took my seat, second from the end, across from Gerald's executive assistant. My fingers rested on the smooth oak, tapping once, then again. I was trying to still them when Gerald walked in, clapping his hands together like some game show host. "All right, team," he boomed, already beaming. "Today's a big one. I'm thrilled to announce our new regional operations director." My throat tightened. My palms tingled. He raised his glass. "My brilliant niece, Brooklyn Hayes." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. My eyes didn't move, but the sound around me exploded. Applause, cheers, chairs shifting. Someone even whooped. "Brooklyn?" I turned my head slowly, mechanically. She stood at the far end of the table in a dove-gray blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Her blonde curls were perfectly styled. Her face lit up like she'd just won Miss America. 8 weeks. She'd been here 8 weeks. I'd been here 156. I forced a smile, my training smile, and brought my hands together in a slow, deliberate clap. Each sound echoed inside me like an insult, a betrayal, a hollow thud where pride should have lived. Gerald's eyes met mine just long enough to register the flicker of something, regret maybe? Or worse, smug justification. Either way, he looked away too fast. "Camille's been instrumental in bringing Brooklyn up to speed," Gerald added, raising his glass higher. "And I know she'll continue to offer her mentorship and full support during this transition." Mentorship. Transition. It felt like watching someone redecorate a house you built from scratch, while asking you to help pick out the curtains. The rest of the announcement was a blur. I caught phrases like fresh ideas, next chapter, dynamic vision. Brooklyn made a short speech thanking Uncle Gerald and everyone who helped me feel so welcome. She even gave me a pointed smile when she mentioned learning so much from Camille's expertise. I felt my jaw tighten. I must have looked calm. I always do. Years in corporate America will teach you how to sit in the middle of a personal earthquake and not spill your water. But inside, something cracked. As the room emptied and everyone moved toward the refreshments table, I stayed seated. My chair suddenly felt too large, like I was a guest at my own funeral. "You okay?" a soft voice asked. It was Miranda from procurement. She touched my arm gently. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I gave her a polite nod and rose to my feet. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. As I walked back to my office, I passed Brooklyn chatting with 2 junior analysts, laughing like she owned the place already. Back at my desk, I closed the door and stared at the wall. 3 Employee of the Year plaques looked back at me, one for every year I'd been here. I thought about the nights I skipped dinner with Ethan, the weekends I pulled data until midnight, the times I backed out of family vacations to cover last-minute crises. I did it all to earn the title that Brooklyn just inherited like a birthday gift. My phone buzzed. "Ethan." "How'd it go? Is it official?" I stared at the message, unable to type. What was I supposed to say? That his father had thrown away 3 years of my life with a champagne toast? I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly, and whispered to the room that didn't care. She got it. Brooklyn got the promotion. Tomorrow I'd smile again. I'd play nice. I'd train her. But tonight? Tonight I would let myself feel it all. The hallway back to my office felt longer than usual. Every footstep echoed louder, like the building itself had decided to amplify the silence I was dragging behind me. People passed me with polite nods. A few gave small, knowing smiles, the kind that say, "We see you and we don't know what to say." Others, predictably, avoided eye contact altogether. That kind of discomfort spreads fast in corporate spaces. It's like no one wants to catch the infection of being passed over. When I reached my door, I paused a moment before opening it. The nameplate still read Camille Walker, Senior Operations Manager. 3 years ago, seeing that title on the door had made me feel proud. Now it felt like a lie carved in steel. I stepped inside and shut the door quietly behind me, like I was sealing off a part of myself. The room was unchanged, everything neat, orderly, intentional. The certificates on the wall, the framed picture of me and Ethan at a company retreat, the potted plant that had somehow survived my 60-hour work weeks. But all of it looked different now, like a museum display of a woman who used to believe she mattered here. My phone buzzed on the desk. "Ethan. How'd it go? Is it official?" I stared at the screen. The message wasn't cruel. It was hopeful, expectant, and somehow that made it worse. My thumbs hovered above the keys, but I couldn't lie. Not to him. Me. "We'll talk tonight." I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. The leather creaked beneath me like an old companion, tired of holding my weight. Through the glass wall, I could see the rest of the office going about its day. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, someone laughing near the copier. Life moved on, even when yours stopped. A soft knock interrupted my spiral. It was Naomi, from finance. Sweet girl. She peeked in like someone approaching a grieving widow. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, Camille," she said. "You deserved that role." I tried to answer, but my voice got stuck somewhere between gratitude and grief. I nodded. That was all I could manage. As the door closed again, I stared at the wall across from me, specifically at the Employee of the Year plaques. 3 of them, lined in perfect symmetry. 3 years. 3 awards. 0 promotions. I didn't hear Gerald knock. He never did. "Got a second?" he asked, already halfway in. My spine straightened automatically. "Of course." He sat in the same guest chair where he'd once promised, just 3 months ago, that the promotion was mine. "I know today wasn't easy," he began. I gave him nothing, just a polite, professional stare. "You're incredibly valuable to Westbridge, Camille. That hasn't changed." I almost laughed. Of course it has. But I kept my face neutral. "Brooklyn's going to need guidance," he continued. "There's a lot she doesn't know yet, and you're the perfect person to help her find her footing." "You want me to train her?" I said flatly. "I'd prefer to say mentor," he replied. There it was again, that sanitized corporate spin. Mentor sounded so noble. It sounded like graceful surrender. "I was under the impression I was preparing for that role," I said. "You were. And you've been phenomenal. But business needs evolve. Brooklyn brings fresh energy, a new perspective." "After 8 weeks." He looked away just for a moment. "You're taking this too personally," he said. I smiled, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. "This is my career, my life. How else should I take it?" He leaned forward, trying for that familiar, fatherly tone. "Camille, your family. Brooklyn needed this opportunity, and you, well, you're secure here." Secure, like an old piece of furniture no one dares throw away. I stood. The conversation was over, even if he didn't know it yet. "I should head home. Ethan's making dinner tonight." He smiled, relieved. "Give my son my love." I nodded, already reaching for my purse. As I walked out, my heels struck the marble floor with sharp, steady clicks. Each one echoed like a warning. She's not done. Not yet. Outside, dusk was settling over Charlotte. The skyline gleamed with indifferent beauty. I sat in my car, engine off, watching the world pass me by through the windshield. It took me 5 full minutes to start the car. I wasn't ready to bring this weight home. Not yet. But I knew one thing for sure. Something had shifted. Not out there. In me. And once that shift starts, There's no going back. I didn't sleep much that night. Ethan kept asking if I was okay, and I kept pretending I was. I just needed time, I told him. But time doesn't mend betrayal. It only magnifies the parts you hadn't dared to look at before. The next morning, I was at my desk by 8:15, reviewing performance reports like nothing had changed. My name was still on the door. My inbox was still overflowing. The world had decided to keep turning, and so, apparently, would I. At 10:03, Gerald knocked. That surprised me. He rarely knocked. "Got a minute?" he asked, standing just outside my door, coffee in hand, and a casual smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I closed my laptop slowly. "Sure." He stepped inside, easing into the leather chair across from my desk, the same one where he'd once told me, "Camille, your promotion is a formality, just a matter of timing." Timing, apparently, had become extremely relative. "I wanted to check in," he began, tone gentle. "How are you holding up?" I smiled politely. "Fine." He nodded, clearly not believing me, but willing to pretend. "I know this transition isn't what you expected," he said. Believe me, I didn't make the decision lightly. "No?" I raised an eyebrow. He cleared his throat. "Brooklyn's got potential, a fresh take. She brings something different to the table. She brings a last name and a business degree. That's not exactly rare in this building." His jaw tightened just enough for me to notice. "Look, Camille, you're one of the most dependable people we've ever had, but leadership means more than just consistency. It's about energy, vision." I held up a hand. "Let's not pretend this is about vision. 3 months ago, you told me I was next in line. You even said no one else deserved it more." "I did say that," he admitted, staring into his coffee. "But things evolve. Needs change." "No, Gerald. Needs don't change. Priorities do." There it was, the first real crack in his corporate armor. "I need you to understand," he said, quieter now. "Brooklyn needed this opportunity." "And I didn't?" "You're secure here," he repeated. "You don't need a title to prove your value. You already have a seat at the table." I laughed, and this time it wasn't polite. "No, Gerald. What I have is a folding chair in the corner, and I've been grateful for it for too long." His brows pulled together. "Camille, your family. You know that." "That's exactly the problem," I said, leaning forward now. "You use that word to justify passing me over, family, but family should mean loyalty both ways, not convenience when it suits you." He didn't respond, just stared down at the edge of my desk like it held answers he couldn't find. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my blazer. "Let me ask you something, Gerald. If I weren't married to your son, would you still expect me to stay quiet? To train Brooklyn? To help her shine in the role I earned?" His eyes flicked up to mine, and for a moment there was no boss, no father-in-law, just a man caught in his own illusion. He started, then stopped. "I think you're taking this personally." "No, I'm finally seeing it clearly." The air between us grew heavy. Something unspoken passed across his face. Regret, maybe, or just the weight of being seen for who he really was. I grabbed my coffee and walked to the door. "Camille," he called after me. "You're not thinking of leaving, are you?" I paused, my hand resting on the knob. "I haven't decided yet," I said over my shoulder. "But you should start thinking about what this place looks like without me." And then I left. Not just the office, not just the meeting. I left the version of myself that kept shrinking to make others comfortable. The woman who waited her turn, trusted promises, and accepted crumbs while smiling. That woman didn't survive the morning Brooklyn Hayes got her champagne toast, and something tells me Gerald Walker is about to realize neither did his safety net. The next morning, she arrived right on time, 9:00 sharp. "Camille!" Brooklyn chirped as she bounced into my office with a pastel planner clutched to her chest. "I brought us both iced lattes. Oat milk, no sugar, right?" I took the cup without a smile. "Thanks," I said, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. She looked like she was headed to a brunch interview for a fashion blog, not walking into a senior leadership role. Sleek curls, fresh manicure, and a blazer that probably cost more than my entire summer wardrobe. Her excitement filled the room like a perfume I hadn't agreed to wear. "So," she said, dropping into the chair across from me and flipping open her planner, "Uncle Gerald said today's all about shadowing you, learning the ropes, whatever you think is most important." Most important? Like 3 years of experience could be broken into digestible, color-coded modules. I tapped my fingers on the desk once, twice. "Let's start with the Morrison account." "Cool, that's the really big one, right?" "That's putting it mildly. They represent nearly a third of our revenue." I pulled up the dashboard and turned the monitor toward her. "You'll need to understand their expectations, their internal quirks, their renewal cycle, their escalation patterns." As I walked her through the intricacies, how Steve Morrison hated being CC'd unnecessarily, how their Atlanta rep always needed deadline reminders via phone, not email, Brooklyn nodded eagerly, taking notes like a student who had no idea what would actually be on the exam. "So, if they're upset about delivery delays, what should I tell them?" "You don't tell them anything right away," I said calmly. "You listen. You understand the issue. Then you give them a realistic resolution with breathing room. Never overpromise." "But if Steve threatens to pull the contract, he won't," I interrupted. "If you handle it with transparency and consistency, he won't. But if you get defensive or vague, he absolutely will." She blinked, her pen frozen midair. "Wow, that's kind of intense." "It's called doing the job," I wanted to say. Instead, I leaned back in my chair. "Brooklyn, these relationships weren't built in boardrooms. They were built in 8 p.m. phone calls, in solving problems no one else wanted to touch, in showing up when it wasn't convenient." She gave me a sheepish grin. "Well, good thing I have you to show me the ropes, huh?" I didn't answer. My patience was already wearing thin, and it was barely lunchtime. She followed me to the break room while I reheated some soup I'd brought from home. She talked the entire time about her MBA thesis, her Pilates instructor, her upcoming trip to Cabo once things settled down. I nodded, smiled when required, but mostly stared at the microwave timer like it held the secrets to my survival. Then I heard them. Gerald's office was right next to the break room. The walls weren't thick. "The transition's going better than I expected," Gerald's voice boomed through the drywall. Then Brooklyn's voice, less confident this time. "Are you sure Camille's okay with all this?" I didn't move. I didn't breathe. "Camille's dependable," Gerald replied. "But we need new energy, someone who'll challenge our thinking." "She seems so good at all of it," Brooklyn said softly, "like she owns it." "That's the issue," Gerald chuckled. "Clients lean on her too much. We need to shift their expectations." I felt the heat rise from my neck to my ears. "She'll adapt," he added. "That's what makes her valuable. She's reliable, predictable. She'll do what we ask." The microwave beeped, but I didn't move. Reliable, predictable, like a machine, like a tool. I walked back to my office in silence, soup untouched. The rest of the day passed in polite, professional instruction. I smiled when needed, corrected gently, answered every question like it didn't tear a piece of me away. But inside, something dark was building. Not grief, not despair. Something colder, sharper, a clarity that sliced through the fog like broken glass. I'd thought being indispensable would protect me. I'd thought loyalty was currency. But I wasn't a partner. I was a placeholder. And placeholders get replaced. It started with the hum of the microwave. I was in the break room, waiting for my soup to reheat, chicken and wild rice from the night before. The kind of lunch you make when you're trying to pretend everything's still normal. But nothing was normal anymore. Brooklyn had followed me earlier, peppering me with more questions, half listening to answers she'd forget by afternoon. I told her I needed a few minutes alone to catch up on emails. She seemed to take the hint, bouncing off with a chirpy, "No worries, enjoy your lunch." So there I stood, staring at the spinning bowl, waiting for the beep. And that's when I heard it. Gerald's office shared a wall with the break room, an old building flaw I used to think of as charming. Now it felt like a curse. His voice carried, unmistakable in its practiced confidence. The transition's going better than I expected. Brooklyn. Softer. You think Camille's really okay with everything? A pause. I leaned slightly toward the wall. She's handling it, Gerald replied. She's always been reliable. That's what makes her so useful. Useful. Not respected, not valued. Useful, like a stapler or a spreadsheet. Brooklyn spoke again, tentative. I just feel kind of weird. I mean, she clearly knows everything, and the way the clients talk about her... She's a safety net, Gerald cut in. That's part of the issue. Our clients have gotten too comfortable with her. It's time to shake things up. There was a pause, like even Brooklyn wasn't sure what to say. She's been nothing but kind to me, she said. Honestly, she's making this easier than it should be. Gerald chuckled. That same hollow, managerial chuckle I'd heard in too many meetings. She's professional to a fault. That's why she'll never walk away. Camille's 42. She's not going to start over somewhere else. This place is all she's got. The microwave beeped, sharp and jarring. I didn't move. My hand rested on the counter, fingers curled tight around the edge like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. All she's got. Like I was some washed-up relic, too old to be ambitious, too loyal to say no. Brooklyn's voice dropped. She seems hurt. And honestly, I get it. She'll adjust. She always does. That's why she's stayed useful for so long. I picked up the soup without tasting it and walked back to my office on autopilot. The hallway blurred at the edges, and I wasn't sure if I was blinking too fast or not at all. Inside, I set the soup down on my desk and sat. My legs didn't feel like they belonged to me. There it was, spelled out in the language of power. I was dependable, not dynamic. Not trusted, but never considered. And the worst part? They were right. I had made myself predictable. 3 years of absorbing every slight, every overlooked idea, every time someone else's shortcut got praised while my strategy got passed over. 3 years of smiling, staying late, giving credit, holding peace. I did it because I thought it would mean something, that it would build toward a moment that would finally be mine. Instead, I'd been building someone else's runway, brick by brick. And now that it was finished, they handed the jet to Brooklyn and asked me to wave her into the sky. I looked around my office, my sanctuary, my prison, the photos, the files, the plants I'd kept alive longer than some of our vendor contracts. My reflection in the window stared back, tired eyes but sharper than they'd been yesterday. This wasn't grief anymore, it was awakening. They didn't think I had options, they thought I'd stay. But they'd miscalculated one thing. I wasn't scared of starting over. I was scared of wasting another day being underestimated. Tomorrow, I'd go back to training Brooklyn like the good soldier they thought I was. But tonight I would open my laptop, and I would start thinking about me. That night, the house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. Ethan had made his famous rosemary chicken, his way of comforting me without pushing. We ate in near silence, the occasional clink of fork on plate filling the gaps neither of us knew how to bridge. After dinner, he poured us each a glass of red wine and sat across from me at the kitchen table. The light above us was soft, warm, familiar. But even in that comforting glow, I felt like a stranger to my own life. "So," he said gently, "are you going to tell me what really happened?" I looked at him, my husband of 11 years. His face was open, concerned, but I could already see the tension behind his eyes. His jaw clenched before I even said a word. I took a breath. "They gave it to Brooklyn." His eyes narrowed. "Wait, the promotion?" I nodded. "But she's been there, 2 months? Not even 9 weeks." He set the wine down hard. "Are you kidding me?" I wish I were. His chair scraped back as he stood, pacing behind me. "My dad told me it was yours. He literally said, 'Camille's a lock.' What the hell changed?" I turned to face him, still seated, my voice low and tired. "Family loyalty. That's what changed." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. pacing now like he needed to burn off betrayal. "So what? They expect you to what? Just smile and clap and train your own replacement like it's a team-building exercise?" I didn't answer. The silence said enough. "I'm calling him," Ethan said, reaching for his phone. I grabbed his wrist. "No, this isn't your fight." He looked down at me. "You're my wife." "I know. But I'm the one who sat through the applause. I'm the one who has to walk into that building every day, knowing they never really saw me." My hand fell away. "Please, let me handle this." Ethan hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but promise me something." "What?" "Whatever you decide, make it yours. Not theirs, not mine, yours." That night, after he'd gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The house was still. Our dog snored softly from her corner. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, steady like breath. My laptop was open on the table. Blank document, blinking cursor. I stared at it for what felt like forever. Then I started typing. "Dear Gerald, please accept this letter as my formal resignation from my position as Senior Operations Manager at Westbridge Solutions. My final day will be Friday, March 15th, allowing for 2 weeks transition. I want to thank you for the opportunities I've had over the past 3 years. I've learned a great deal and am grateful for the experience. I wish the company continued success in the future. Sincerely, Camille Walker." That was it. No barbed comments. No bitterness on paper. Just a clean ending. But behind those words was something sharper than rage. Clarity. I read it 3 times. Each time my shoulders relaxed a little more. Then I printed it on our home office printer, signed it in blue ink, and slipped it into an envelope like I was tucking away a piece of my past. The moment the flap sealed, I knew something had shifted in me permanently. I wasn't going to slam the door. I didn't need to. I was simply done. Done begging to be seen. Done auditioning in a theater that never planned to cast me. I turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and for the first time in weeks, I slept like a woman who didn't owe anyone anything. The sky was still gray when I pulled into the Westbridge parking lot the next morning. I dressed with care, navy suit, hair pinned neatly, my grandmother's pearl studs, not to impress, to armor. I walked through the glass doors with my usual calm, greeted Marie at reception, and stepped into the elevator with the envelope in my purse. It felt heavier than paper, more like a boundary I'd waited too long to draw. At my desk, I gave myself a few quiet minutes. Opened my inbox, answered a couple of vendor queries, reviewed a performance dashboard I would soon no longer be responsible for. At exactly 10 o'clock, I stood, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward Gerald's office. Marie looked up as I approached. "Morning, Camille. He's on a call, but you can go on in when he finishes." "No rush," I said, offering her a warm but brief smile. "I'll wait." She nodded, her eyes soft with something close to concern. She had always liked me, I think. Maybe she even knew this moment had been building for longer than anyone admitted. A few minutes later, Gerald opened his office door, phone still pressed to his ear. He waved me in without missing a beat. I stepped inside, settled into the familiar guest chair, and waited while he paced and talked projections and quarterly trends with someone who clearly wasn't listening either. When he finally hung up, he turned to me, already distracted. "What's up?" "I've got back-to-backs until mid-afternoon." Without a word, I pulled the envelope from my bag and placed it on the center of his desk. He looked at it like it might explode. "What's this?" "Open it." He slid his letter opener through the seal with practiced ease. But as he unfolded the page, I watched something shift in his face. Curiosity, confusion, panic. "You're resigning," he said, almost choking on the word. "I am." He stood abruptly, the chair squeaking behind him. "Camille, come on. This isn't necessary." "I disagree." He paced, palms pressed together like he was praying or plotting. "Is this about the promotion? I told you we can revisit responsibilities, maybe a new title, project ownership, something that reflects your contributions." "I don't want a new title," I said. "I want to be respected." And I finally realized that's never going to happen here. He looked stunned, as if I'd slapped him. That's not fair. You've always been valued here. No, I said, quietly but clearly. I've been used here. You valued what I gave you, as long as I didn't ask for anything in return. His voice dropped. Camille, your family. I stood slowly. Then you should have been honest with me. He blinked, caught off guard. Honest? You let me train Brooklyn for a job you already gave her. You described me as predictable, said I'd never leave. His mouth opened, then closed. He sat heavily in his chair, suddenly looking all of his 63 years. You heard that, he said, like it was dawning on him that walls can talk. Every word. The silence that followed was different this time, not awkward, not strained, just final. I made a mistake, he said finally. I nodded. Yes, and I'm no longer willing to be the one who absorbs it. He stared at the letter again. You're sure? I picked up my purse. I was sure last night. I'm even more sure now. He stood again, this time slower. Camille, don't go. It was quiet, uncertain, for the first time not coming from a man who assumed the answer would be yes. I offered him a small, measured smile. You don't get to ask that anymore. Marie looked up as I exited, eyebrows raised. Everything okay, honey? She asked. I gave her a real smile this time. Not forced, not polite, just honest. Everything's finally okay. As I walked back to my office, I passed 2 junior analysts in the hallway. They smiled at me, unaware of what had just happened, unaware that in a few short weeks, I'd be gone, and this version of me would be a memory. But inside, I felt light. Not because I was leaving, but because I had finally stopped waiting to be chosen. 2 weeks after I handed Gerald my resignation, I found myself rearranging pens in my home office. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning. I was in yoga pants and an old Davidson college sweatshirt, sipping lukewarm coffee while half listening to a podcast about leadership mindsets, the kind of content I used to nod along with but never have time to apply. Now I had nothing but time. I'd updated my resume, polished my LinkedIn, sent out a few feelers to people I hadn't spoken to since college. Mostly, I'd been trying to figure out what came next. And that's when the phone rang. Unknown number. Charlotte area code. I hesitated, thumb hovering over decline, but something in me said, pick up. Hello? Hi, is this Camille Walker? It is? This is Rebecca King from Blue Ridge Logistics. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I straightened in my seat. Not at all. I'll get to the point. I was speaking with Daniel Reyes yesterday, and your name came up. He had glowing things to say. Daniel, Morrison Industries, my biggest client at Westbridge for 3 years. The man who once told me, you know my business better than some of my own execs. I'm flattered, I said carefully. I wasn't sure he even knew I'd left. Oh, he noticed. In fact, he said your departure was the beginning of some concerning shifts. There was a pause. Rebecca's voice turned more direct. We have an opening for a regional operations director. It's a senior leadership role overseeing 3 departments and managing top-tier accounts, including Morrison. Daniel thinks you'd be perfect. I swallowed. That's a lot to take in. Would you be open to a conversation later this week? Yes, I said, before she could finish. Yes, I would. We exchanged details. She promised to email me a job description and some preliminary benefits info. After we hung up, I just sat there, hands still on the desk, heart doing strange things in my chest. It wasn't just a job offer. It was the job I should have had, at Westbridge, but cleaner, bigger, on my terms. The email landed within the hour. I opened it, bracing for reality to set in, and then blinked. The salary was 30% higher than what I made at Westbridge. Stock options, a relocation stipend if I wanted it. And there it was, Regional Operations Director. No acting, no mentorship track, no strings. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. That night, when Ethan came home, I told him everything. He stood in the kitchen with his tie half loosened, mouth parted in disbelief. Wait, Blue Ridge Logistics? Camille, that's huge. I nodded. And Daniel recommended you directly? I nodded again. He shook his head slowly, the smile forming on his lips like it was too big to hold back. I knew it. I knew they'd realize what they lost. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just let it wash over me. The validation, the unexpected grace of being seen by someone who didn't owe me loyalty, but gave it anyway. Later, alone at my desk again, I reread the offer email. Not for the numbers, not for the title, but for what it symbolized. That I wasn't over, that 42 wasn't too late, that someone had finally seen my work and said, "We need her." I didn't respond that night. I wasn't rushing into this the way I once would have, desperate to prove myself to people who never intended to promote me. No, this time I would move with intention. But I already knew my answer. My first morning at Blue Ridge Logistics felt like stepping into a different world. The building was sleek and open, glass panels, warm natural wood, and soft light that made everything feel awake. Not just stylish. Intentional, like someone had designed it for people, not just productivity. I checked in at the front desk and was immediately greeted by Sarah Martinez, the interim operations lead. She looked to be in her late 30s, sharp and grounded, with a presence that didn't need raising her voice. "Camille," she said, offering a firm handshake. "I've been looking forward to this." "So have I said, and meant it. She walked me through the main floor. No stiff introductions, no awkward silences, just a natural rhythm, like they were ready for me before I even got there. "We've got a lot going on," Sarah said as we passed a shared workspace full of lively chatter. "But everyone's eager to meet you. Rebecca briefed us on your background. Your client retention numbers are legendary." "Legendary's a strong word," I smiled. "I just didn't like losing people." "That mindset is exactly why you're here." We stopped outside a glass-walled conference room. Inside, a half-dozen team leads were reviewing a client dashboard. Sarah held the door open for me. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be." The team looked up, then smiled. Not one stiff nod, not one dismissive glance. This wasn't Westbridge. We spent the morning reviewing departmental goals and client touchpoints. When I asked for historical data on the Anderson Group, their most volatile account, everyone listened. When I pointed out inefficiencies, no one got defensive. They asked questions, real ones, and they took notes. By lunch, Sarah and I were back in her office, poring over revenue reports. "You've clearly dealt with high-stakes clients before," she said. "Our situation with Anderson's been tense." "I've dealt with worse," I said, "but we'll need to move fast. Their COO's losing patience. We've tried smoothing things over with scheduled check-ins, but it hasn't stuck." "Because you're managing the relationship like a process," I said, "not a person." Sarah looked at me, impressed. "You say that like it's obvious." "It is. Once you've spent 3 years holding a company together with late-night calls and midnight spreadsheets, you learn where the real loyalty lives." She leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her thigh. "You know, if I'm being honest," she said, "I was a little worried. Thought maybe we'd be dealing with someone who came in with baggage, ego, maybe something to prove. Fair. And instead you came in ready to solve problems." I smiled. "Because I finally work somewhere that lets me." That afternoon, I led my first strategy session. No one questioned my place in the room. No one asked if I needed approval from someone else. When I suggested restructuring our client comms flow, Marcus Williams, the CEO, actually said, "Walk me through it." I did. And when I finished, he nodded slowly. "You were doing this at Westbridge and they didn't give you a leadership role?" "They said I was too predictable for leadership." He laughed, an honest, almost shocked laugh. "Their loss." Those 2 words hit deeper than I expected, not just because they were validating, but because they weren't said to flatter. They were said as fact. Later, alone in my new office, the view facing the city skyline, I finally exhaled. This was what it felt like to be seen, not just for being reliable, not just for being convenient, but for being damn good at what I do. I looked at the framed photo I'd brought from home, me and Ethan on our anniversary last year, standing on a mountain ridge outside Asheville. My hair wind-blown, his arm around my waist, both of us laughing. I thought about what it had taken to get here, the betrayal, the quiet rage, the resignation, the leap. And then this calm, this confidence, this clarity. I wasn't just in the right office. I was finally in the right story. It started with a familiar voice at a networking event. I was sipping sparkling water at a quarterly logistics mixer hosted downtown, my first since joining Blue Ridge. I hadn't planned to stay long, just shake a few hands, smile for a couple of photos, then quietly disappear back into my car and into the quiet safety of home. But as I stepped away from the catering table, I heard someone call my name. Camille Walker? I turned. It was Janet Mills, director at Pacific Financial, one of Westbridge's mid-tier accounts. We'd collaborated on a handful of contracts. She was sharp, efficient, always sent thank you notes. "Janet," I said, surprised. "Wow, it's been a while." She leaned in for a brief, polite hug. "I heard you moved to Blue Ridge. Good for you." "Thanks. It's been a refreshing change." Her eyebrows lifted. "I'll bet. Things at Westbridge haven't exactly been smooth since you left." I tilted my head. "Oh?" She lowered her voice. "We've had to follow up 3 times to get responses on routine compliance reports. Brooklyn, your replacement, I assume, she took over our account. I emailed her about a minor delivery dispute, and it took her 3 weeks to reply. 3 weeks. That doesn't sound like her tone from the leadership announcement," I said softly, not quite smiling. Janet chuckled. "We used to brag to our CFO about Westbridge's client service. Now, he's asking if we should start looking elsewhere." Before I could respond, someone called her name from across the room, and she waved goodbye. I stood there for a moment longer, the sounds of polite conversation humming around me, but my mind had already drifted elsewhere. I'd wondered if anyone noticed when I left. Turns out they did. The second confirmation came 2 weeks later. My office phone rang mid-morning. The screen read, "Daniel Reyes." I picked up. "Daniel," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "What a surprise." "I hope this isn't a bad time." "Not at all. What's going on?" There was a pause, a breath. "I wanted to give you a heads up, and a thank you." My brow furrowed. "All right, I'm listening." "We're preparing to terminate our partnership with Westbridge at the end of this quarter." Silence. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, though part of me wasn't surprised. "They've missed 3 scheduled check-ins. When I finally got Brooklyn on the phone, she couldn't explain half the metrics I asked about, kept saying she'd circle back. She never did." I sat forward. "What happened to escalation protocol?" "That's just it," he said, frustration rising in his voice. "We had a shipping error. $2 million in product sitting in the wrong distribution hub." I called, expecting urgency. You know what she told me? I already knew, but I let him say it. "She told us to file a complaint through the portal." Camille, I was furious. I thought it had to be a mistake. My heart sank. Not for Westbridge, but for the people I'd once led, the clients I'd once protected. "Gerald didn't even try to keep us," Daniel continued, "said they were moving in a new direction. If we couldn't adapt, maybe we weren't the right fit." I closed my eyes. That sounded exactly like him. "I'm sorry, Daniel. That partnership meant a lot to me." "To me too," he replied. "But this call isn't just to vent. I wanted you to know your reputation held. You made an impact. And honestly, recommending you to Blue Ridge? Best call I've made in years." We hung up. And for a moment, I just sat at my desk, hands folded, absorbing what I'd heard. Westbridge wasn't collapsing because I left. It was collapsing because it bet on a shortcut over substance, on a name over earned trust, on someone's niece instead of someone's record. And that bet was failing. Loudly. I didn't gloat. I didn't text Ethan with a smug update, but a quiet knowing settled in my chest. They thought I was predictable, that I had no options, that I'd never leave. But here I was. And the fallout was only beginning. The call came on a Wednesday evening, just after dinner. Ethan had just stepped into the kitchen to rinse our plates when my phone buzzed. The number wasn't saved, but I recognized the area code. I hesitated, then picked up. "Camille? It's Linda. Linda Harris." I stood up straighter, surprised. "Linda, from accounting?" "Yeah." Her voice cracked a little, like she'd been rehearsing this call for hours. "I hope this isn't a bad time." "Not at all. Are you okay?" A pause. "Honestly, no." I moved into the living room and sat down, the softness of the couch a sharp contrast to the weight in her voice. "I wasn't sure if I should even call you," she said, "but I didn't know who else to talk to." "What's going on?" She exhaled. "Things are falling apart at Westbridge. 3 clients are gone. Everyone's whispering about layoffs. I've been with that company for 19 years, Camille. I've seen changes, sure. But this feels different." My heart tightened. I could hear the fear tucked between her words, fear I'd once carried in silence, too. "I'm sorry," I said. "I know that place meant a lot to you." "It did. Still does, I guess. But lately, I feel invisible. Like no one's steering the ship. Gerald's barely around. Brooklyn's, well, she doesn't even pretend to understand what we do, and now they're talking about outsourcing payroll. I'd be the first to go." I leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Linda, you're not the reason that place is struggling. You held half the back end together." "I don't want pity," she said quickly. When I saw you land at Blue Ridge, something clicked. You left, and you landed somewhere better." I didn't speak right away, because the truth was, I had. "What are you saying?" I asked gently. "I'm saying, if there's ever an opening, anything, I'd love the chance to work with you again, even part-time. I'm 58, Camille. I know I'm not shiny and new, but I'm steady, and I still have something to offer." Her words hit me harder than I expected. At Westbridge, loyalty had been treated like a weakness. But here she was, proving it was a strength, a quiet, steadfast power that refused to give up. "Would you be okay if I passed your name to HR?" I asked. "We're expanding. There's a chance something might open up soon. I can't promise, but—" "Yes," she interrupted. "Thank you. Truly." We talked a little longer. She told me about her daughter's college graduation, about her husband's early retirement plans. But beneath it all, I could still hear the thread of uncertainty in her voice, the kind that lingers when your future is tied to a place no longer tied to you. After we hung up, I sat still for a long moment, the phone warm in my hand. I remembered the time Linda stayed late with me during a last-minute audit, fueling us both with stale granola bars and sarcasm. I remembered how she caught an invoicing error that saved Westbridge nearly $90,000, and how Gerald never once acknowledged her. And I thought, this is what they lost. Not just me, but everyone like me. People who cared quietly, who carried more than they were paid to carry. People who weren't flashy, but who were damn near irreplaceable. Ethan walked in, drying his hands with a dish towel. "Everything okay?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, just someone from my old life asking for a new beginning." He gave me a look, gentle, knowing. "Are you going to help her?" "I already did," I said, "and I'm glad I can." That night, I emailed Rebecca, CC'd HR, and wrote a short, confident recommendation for Linda. I didn't oversell. I didn't embellish, I just told the truth. She's dependable, experienced, fiercely committed, and we'd be lucky to have her. As I hit send, I felt something shift again. Not the sharp, righteous clarity from when I left Westbridge. This was quieter, softer, because maybe part of healing isn't just walking away from the past. Maybe it's making sure the ones worth saving get to walk out too. The invitation arrived in a heavy cream envelope, hand-addressed in looping cursive. "Gerald Walker and Westbridge Solutions request the pleasure of your company at our annual employee recognition dinner. Black tie, downtown Marriott. Saturday, 6 p.m. Sharp." I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't understand it, because I did. This wasn't a peace offering, it was a chess move, Gerald wanted to show the room that things were fine, that the woman who'd walked away had come back, gracious, smiling, holding no grudge. Ethan leaned over my shoulder as I turned the envelope over for the 5th time. "You're not seriously thinking about going, are you?" "I think I am." He blinked. "Camille, that man disrespected you for years. You don't owe him a single second." "I know," I said softly, "but I'm not going for him." The truth was, I needed to see that room one last time. Not for closure, for perspective. I didn't need revenge. I needed a mirror. I chose a dark emerald dress that fit like confidence. Not flashy, not apologetic, just unmistakably mine. Rebecca insisted on coming with me. "Moral support," she said with a grin. "Or just to see the circus, your call." We entered the ballroom together. Crystal chandeliers, soft jazz humming in the background, the same white tablecloths, the same awkward laughter trying to pass as ease. Except I wasn't the same. People noticed me right away. Some smiled too quickly. Others looked like they'd seen a ghost. I saw Tom, one of the junior managers, near the bar. "Camille," he said, clutching his drink. "We all miss you. It hasn't been the same since you left." I nodded. "I hope it's getting better." He gave a nervous half-laugh. "That depends on whether Gerald makes it through Q3. We were interrupted by the dimming lights. The MC welcomed everyone, and then, there he was. Gerald. Still crisp in his tux, still silver-haired and commanding, but older now. Worn. The confidence had frayed around the edges. "Good evening," he began. This year brought unexpected challenges and hard-earned lessons. I watched him scan the room. When his eyes landed on me, he didn't flinch. He smiled. "This year, we're introducing a new award," he continued, "for leadership that endures, even beyond tenure, for influence that continues to shape our values." And just like that, I knew. "Camille Walker, would you please join us on stage?" For a heartbeat, I froze. Rebecca nudged me. "Go," she whispered. "This is yours." The room applauded, but not wildly. It was cautious. Conflicted, still I walked, not rushed, not dramatic, just steady. Gerald handed me a crystal plaque. His voice lowered as we exchanged it. "Thank you for what you built." I took the mic. My hand didn't shake. "Thank you," I said. I wasn't expecting this. A polite laugh. I scanned the room, faces I'd worked beside for 3 years. Some smiling, some looking down. Brooklyn sat at the front table, posture stiff, eyes unreadable. "I spent a long time in this company believing that hard work would eventually speak loud enough," I said. "But I've learned something since leaving." Now they were listening. Hard work matters, but only when it's seen. Loyalty matters, but only when it's mutual, and no title, no award, should ever be a substitute for respect. A hush settled over the crowd. I'm proud of what I built here, but I'm even prouder of the decision to walk away when I knew I deserved more. I stepped back. Gerald took the mic, his smile visibly strained. "Well said," he muttered. As I returned to my table, the applause was hesitant, but real. A few people stood. Most didn't. That was okay. I wasn't there to be celebrated. I was there to be free. The ballroom was nearly empty when Gerald approached our table. Rebecca had just stepped away to grab our coats, and I was tucking the Crystal Award back into its velvet case when I heard his voice behind me. "Camille, do you have a moment?" I turned to find him standing there, shoulders slightly slumped, hands clasped in front of him, eyes searching mine like he wasn't sure what version of me he was about to face. "I suppose I do," I said, calm but clear. He gestured toward a quiet corner near the exit, and we walked together, though it didn't feel like walking with a mentor. It felt like walking with someone I used to know in a language we no longer shared. "I didn't expect that speech," he said once we were out of earshot. "You were honest." "I was," I replied. "Finally." He looked down at the carpet, then back at me. "Camille, I want to talk about something that's overdue." My heart didn't race. My palms didn't sweat. I already knew what was coming. "We're restructuring," he said. "Leadership's shifting again, if you'd consider it. I'd like to bring you back, at an executive level this time, Senior VP of Operations." I didn't blink. "That's a big offer. You've earned it." Have I? Or has the company just started to feel the consequences of undervaluing people like me? His mouth opened, then shut. I watched him wrestle with the answer he didn't want to give. "Things have been hard since you left," he admitted. "Brooklyn wasn't ready. She never was. You knew that." He took a breath. "That's why we need you back. You built the foundation. No one understands the clients like you do." I let the silence stretch, let him feel the weight of what he'd let go. "You know," I said, "6 months ago I might have said yes, out of some misplaced hope that this place would finally see me." His expression shifted, tight around the jaw, the faintest flicker of regret behind his eyes. "But I don't need to prove anything to you anymore, Gerald," I continued, "or to this company. Camille, No," I said, firm now. "You don't get to rewrite the story. You had the chance to elevate me when it mattered. Instead, you asked me to shrink so someone else could shine." "I thought you'd stay," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I thought you were loyal." "I was," I replied. "That was the problem." He looked away, and for a moment he seemed old, not just in years, in posture, in presence, like the room had caught up with him. "I wish things had gone differently," he said. "I don't," I said softly. "Because if they had, I might still be there, smiling through meetings, fixing mistakes I didn't make, waiting for permission to lead." He exhaled slowly, like he finally understood this wasn't negotiation. This was closure. "I hope things turn around for you, Gerald. I really do." Then I reached into my clutch, pulled out a business card, and held it out. "If any of your people are looking for a place that values them, send them my way." He took it without speaking. "Good night," I said. And I walked away, heels clicking against marble, the weight of the plaque in my hand, the room behind me fading like an old script I no longer needed to perform. Rebecca met me by the doors, holding out my coat. "How'd that go?" I slipped into it, letting the silk lining settle over my shoulders like armor. "I told him no." She smiled. "Good." As we stepped out into the cool evening air, I looked up at the skyline, clean and quiet, a city still humming with possibilities. For years, I'd been waiting for someone to say I was ready, but tonight I realized I'd been ready all along. I didn't think the building would still smell like fresh paint, but it did. Warm sunlight spilled across the polished floors of Horizon's new headquarters, the first space we'd designed from the ground up. Glass walls framed the downtown skyline, but inside, the vibe was calm, focused, purposeful, just like us. "Hey, boss," Ethan called from across the open concept bullpen, tapping a white box on the reception desk. "It came." I raised an eyebrow. "What came?" He grinned and slid it toward me. "The thing you said you weren't ready for." I opened the box slowly. Inside sat a bronze phoenix sculpture, small enough to fit in my palm but powerful in its lines, wings mid-rise, beak tilted upward, strong, ascending. I stared at it, stunned silent. Ethan leaned on the desk. "I figured. If anyone deserved to have their own symbol, it's you." My throat tightened. "You kept us together," he continued, voice soft now. "You took what they tried to break in you and built something better with it. This place, it breathes because of your fight." I looked at him, blinking back the sting behind my eyes. "You're going to make me cry in front of our interns." He laughed. "Let them see it. Real leadership cries and keeps going." I picked up the phoenix, feeling the cool metal in my hand. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying something heavy. I felt like I was holding something that finally fit. Later that afternoon, I stood alone in my office, glass door open, sunlight casting quiet patterns across the wood floor. On the wall opposite my desk, I placed the phoenix on a floating shelf. Next to it, I added something else, the crystal plaque from Westbridge's recognition dinner, a silent contrast. One was a symbol of delayed acknowledgement, the other, a testament to self-made freedom. The door creaked, and Rebecca poked her head in. "You ready?" I smiled. "Yeah." We were hosting our first mentorship panel for women in tech that evening. Full house, waitlist, and everything. As we walked toward the event hall, she asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd said yes to Gerald's offer?" "Sometimes," I said honestly. And then I remember, I didn't leave to spite them. I paused, hand brushing the lanyard at my neck. I left to remember who I was before they told me who I wasn't. The panel was electric, young women asking bold questions, eager to build futures on their own terms. I shared my story not to glorify the fall, but to illuminate the rise. And when someone asked me, "What advice would you give to someone who feels invisible at work?" I answered with my whole heart, "Stop waiting for someone else to name your value. You already have it." The applause wasn't thunderous. It didn't need to be. It was honest, and I could feel every woman in the room standing just a little taller. That night, I sat by the window in my apartment, tea in hand, city lights flickering below. In the quiet, I let myself reflect. There was a time I thought the goal was to be invited to the table. Now I realize I was meant to build my own. I used to believe loyalty meant staying, even when it hurt. Now I know loyalty to myself has to come first. And I finally understand that recognition doesn't come from a plaque or a title or a public dinner speech. It comes the moment you stop asking for permission to exist. So if my story spoke to you, if you've ever been passed over, silenced, or told to be grateful for crumbs, this is your sign. Share your experience in the comments. Your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear. Tap like if you've ever walked away to find your worth. Subscribe for more true-to-life stories about power, pain, and quiet victories. And send this to someone you believe in. They may need it more than you think, because somewhere out there's another Camille. And this time, she's not waiting for approval. She's already rising, just like a phoenix.